She made him sit down and said, now listen to this podcast, the whole thing. Listen to it.
This particular curse was written on clay bowls and then smashed so that it couldn't never be undone. But it can be. By recognizing a pattern, then we can through will can overcome these patterns.
He starts talking about what he called monkeys with human heads that climbed through the window and scared him so bad that he didn't even want to talk about it.
From east of the Mississippi, investigating the unknown. Welcome to the Sixth Sensory Podcast. This is the new age of pirate radio. This is the last vestige of the outlaw.
There's a archaeological component to this also, with the old artifacts from the old pagan world stored inside of this mountain. They had those techniques to move big megaliths.
These legends, they come out of a reality, but it's a spiritual reality that we've so shut down to.
My guest today is researcher, explorer, and host of the Pillars of the Past YouTube and Instagram. Raul, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Tim. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. You're one of the best kept secrets on the internet right now in terms of findings and some of the undocumented sites you found. I don't know of anyone else who's doing what you do and getting the kind of results that you're getting, which I definitely want to cover some of those today. But if you want to give us a backstory, if you want to go into, how you got into exploration and archaeology, by all means, I want to give you the chance to do that.
No, for sure. I've primarily been focused in Peru. Eventually, I'm hoping to expand to other areas in the world. But I have, a personal connection with Peru. My mother is Peruvian. And so my dad was American. When they met, he fell in love with Peru. And so growing up, I would go down there like every year and a half. And I have my aunts and my uncles down there. And, my dad had a very adventurous spirit. And so growing up, we went all over. We went to, everywhere from the coast to the Andes to the Amazon and back again. And I fell in love with the culture. I fell in love with archaeology. I actually have it up on my website now, pillarsofthepast.com. But I found home video footage of when I was about 10 years old and I went to Machu Picchu. And back then things were a lot looser. You didn't have to stay on the tour path. You could go kind of exploring on your own. So I was about 10 years old. I went into this cave, and this little stone cave, and saw something shiny in the walls, and it was seashells. And I found seashells at Machu Picchu. You're 8,000 feet above sea level. And it just blew my mind as a kid.
Incredible.
And so that has fueled decades of research and independent study into our ancient past, ancient cultures, ancient architecture. And so last year, I was down in Peru for Christmas. So this was 2023. And I've mapped all these places out on Google Earth, these things I thought were ruins that they didn't have any labels or any place markers or anything like that. And I was like, I think this is a ruin. So last Christmas, we did the Christmas thing, and I just went off for a few hours into this valley looking for this. I just plugged the coordinates in my GPS and I made it there, and they were indeed ruins. So I did it again. And so I was 2 for 2 at that point.
Yeah.
Well, then I came back and I posted about it, and the reception was humbling. It was not what I expected, and that fueled me putting a lot of the research that I've done out there on the social media channels, which just got an even bigger reception. And so in May, I took a 30-day trip down to Peru with all these places I had identified. Again, no markers, no place markers, no labels or anything like that. and I went up and down the coast of Peru in that month. I drove about 3,000 kilometers. I hiked. I mean, you can see it on the channel. I'm scaling mountains. I'm in the desert, isolated, alone, and I went to 90 locations. And so far, my accuracy, so I've been 100% accurate. Every single place has been a ruin.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of them did have Ministry of Culture designations when I got there. So a lot of them just aren't on public maps. So I found that out. But there were a handful of locations that didn't have any Ministry of Culture designations. They didn't have any survey markers, and the only people that had been there in the past were looters. Unfortunately, I didn't come across a single site that hadn't been looted in some capacity. But that has been that was the adventure this past year, and I'm starting. I mean, I only made it to about 10% of the places I've mapped out.
Yeah. So that's interesting. And I followed that 30-day trek you did there. And I'd like to get into some of that in detail actually, but I do want to point out that even though it's got that ministry designation, that that just means that the government knows about it. But the public doesn't,
Correct.
right? Outside of maybe some locals who live in the area, um, I would say that the public doesn't know about a lot of these sites that you've found or refound or however we want to put it, because um, I went through and watched that whole 30-day thing you did, and I've never heard of any of that. Well, for the most part, I've not heard of any of that. So I would say that you're still finding relatively unknown, sites,
Well,
unknown to the public.
On that note, I recently spoke with Dr. Ed Barnhart, and he said back in the 1900s, in 1920s, there were a lot of explorers going out and finding things, and so they would jot it down, and they would jot it down, and that would kind of be it. So to your point, these things are in a vault somewhere, file, they have it documented in a system somewhere.
Mhm.
But as far as research on these places goes, there isn't much. On the majority of them. There is not much. No, maybe brief surveys of trying to get the lay of the land, but beyond that, nothing, certainly nothing invasive. They try to get dating when they can from, bones or pieces of corn, things of that nature. But as far as any sort of complex, intensive reporting, it's just it
Yeah.
doesn't exist.
People will know about the Nazca lines.
Yeah.
And you went to, and you can correct me if I say things wrong, because I probably will. You went to these pyramids called the Kawake pyramids.
The Kawachi. Kawachi.
Kawachi. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so I saw you went to the Kawachi pyramids, and they're part of the civilization, I think, who constructed the Nazca lines, which, there's a lot of theories about those. They've got a very like ancient aliens view from space type of feel about them, and that's just a theory. I'm not saying it
Yeah.
is ancient aliens, but I just I heard, so I looked up those pyramids, and I saw they're associated with the Nazca culture, and as I'm researching, I heard the phrase Nazca cult pop out. That's associated with this site because maybe it was a sacred area for them. And, I'm thinking that it seemed like there were temples, maybe it was a sacred site. And it kind of maybe reminded me of Petra in the Middle East, because I'm watching you and you're covering all this stuff, and you're showing this place, and I'm thinking, what's underground? How extensive are the tunnels? And did they store, the civilization's treasury there? And, my mind is going to all these places because, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm watching you and I'm like pondering the places that you're going to, but, did you find, you could tell me whatever you want about those pyramids, but I was going to ask, did you find human remains near
Uh,
those pyramids?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
one of the most shocking. So, one of the more recent theories about the Kawachi site itself, and so it is. And when it was constructed, it was plastered with all white, so it was this beautiful, shiny, huge structure. But it was actually carved out of the bedrock itself, and so which was very. And cultures up and down the coast did that. And so the one of the more recent theories is because there isn't really housing there, right? I mean, you can go on Google Earth and you can see around, there's like, it almost looks like administrative centers and stuff, but nothing that would appear to be actual housing. And so the theory is that this was a pilgrimage site. This is where people came to worship. It was some sort of central location. And so cultures would come from all over and they're in the desert and either on their way or on the way out. Perhaps some of the Nazca lines were kind of offerings or homage to, the cultural beliefs there. So
Yeah.
because there's no set pattern to them, there's no, I mean, some of them are carved out on top of other ones, and some of them align to things, some of them don't. So it's still a very big mystery. But particularly in the Nazca area, I came across, unfortunately, a lot of burial sites. And I want to say the most shocking was, I mean, I'm literally standing here in this part of the desert, and as far as I could see are skulls and bones. And what was worse is, so the way they wrap their mummies, you can go, they have museums where they have the actual mummies, and so they're wrapped in cotton and
Yeah.
then textile and then ropes around them and then more textile. And you literally just saw cotton all over the place. And the thing about Nazca is that it's in the desert and it's so arid that it preserves these things so incredibly well to the point where hair is still preserved, right there in the desert. And so you could see these bones, it's still attached to some of the textile, still attached to the cotton.
Yes.
And I mean, it was just, it's a really devastating feeling when you're there, to be
Yeah.
there isolated alone and that's all you see. It felt whatever group that went out and looted these, it was savage. That's the
Well,
word I came up with.
it is. It very much is. One of the unique things about your channel is that you come across human remains. And yeah, it's a sombering thing, but it's also a very unique thing to your channel.
Yeah, there
And
was a point where there was one post got a bit of controversy. People
yeah,
were saying they shouldn't post this, or I should, and the way it actually helped me formulate my own stance on these things, which has been kind of the blessing. I feel like as I've been growing with the channel, as the channel's growing itself, and it's kind of happening with everybody, so it feels very communal, and I really that speaks to my heart in a way that really helps to keep me motivated and encouraged. Uh,
I don't think that history should be censored. That's my
no,
personal opinion.
no, and so the thing is, what I came to is, this is, for lack of better words, it's more journalistic than anything else. This is what things look like,
Yes.
and I in an ideal world, part of the reason for it is it is shocking. I mean, I will 100%, it's shocking, but it's also what can be done about it, and ideally with that awareness can come some efforts and um, methods of preservation.
I'll say this though, one of my favorite moments on your channel is when one of those days you're out there, you do show the mummies and you do show one of the mummies that's still wrapped and there is cotton everywhere. I've got that image burnt in my mind. And I think it was like the very next day, you're walking through and you see a shrub, a cotton shrub, and you hold up the bud in your hand off of one of the stems, and it's growing brown cotton, and it's the same cotton they used in the mummies.
Yep.
I
And
mean,
that's at I was actually at where a lot of these mummies preserved. There's an archaeological site called Changuil, and it is where these mummies were buried in their tombs underground, and they, because the desert preserves them so well, they're still there. They have it roped off so tourists can come and see these things. And it was actually the gentleman at the site that showed me the cotton, and I hadn't put two and two together. And it was in that moment where
Mm,
it's like, this is what is at the site.
wow. I made a mistake here today too, and I just realized it because I had some pictures that I was on my phone. I
Yeah.
forgot to send them to my laptop because I had some pictures of stuff that I wanted to highlight from your channel and from your research, but we'll just have to describe them today. But one of the pictures I wanted to pull up since we're talking about it is there's a picture that you've taken, kind of an aerial picture that's looking down into a pit. It's a nicely constructed pit. It's got, looks like it's brick, but there's three mummies down in there, and it looks like something off of a movie set because you see they look like, it looks like a basket of cotton with a human head on top, but it's just a skull. It's a skull, it's the skull of somebody. And there's three of them down there. And it just looks like something straight out of a movie. And I was going to ask you, that's not part of a museum or anything? That's just there?
That is Changuil.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, that was Changuil. And so so for the channel, that's what I used as reference. But so when the mummies were buried, they're buried in this seated position with knees to the chest and then the arms wrapped around the knees. And so that's why, and then they're wrapped with the textile and the cotton, and that's why you'll see the kind of skull above that bundle.
Hmm.
But in that Changuillo site, that's all original. That's all. Those are the same mummies that existed thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And so, I mean,
I
my
just
best
think
guess is that people were ripping these apart because they
looking
assumed that
for,
there was jewelry or
yes,
something.
yes, that's what I was thinking too. Somebody went out there, and who knows when these looters did this. Like, this stuff's been out there for so long, but I mean, I just couldn't believe, and I'm just going to reiterate this one more time. I could not believe that I was watching somebody film themselves walk through the desert and see skeletons just laying out in the open. So I think you should be. Thank you for documenting that. That's powerful. It's very powerful. So, and
It's
a lot of
unfortunate.
these sites are super powerful in their obscurity. They're just super powerful. I mean, I don't know, like Supe, if I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
Unknown to me until you documented Supe.
So it's
And
super.
go ahead. I'm
That
sorry.
that's one of the. I mean, that was one of my favorite little parts of the trip. So Supe, the Corral Supe culture is, I mean, it's the oldest stone pyramid temples in the Americas, and they predate the current academic dating of the pyramids in Egypt by 1,000 years. So, I mean, it's pretty wild that this culture came up with these stone pyramid temples that long ago. What's even more shocking about that is that there was no writing. There weren't any stone carvings or anything like that. So it was just these temples, but massive, massive buildings. And so the main site is Corral, and then that's the Norte Chico culture. But then all along the next couple valleys, you have similar structures. And so they're attributed to the same culture. And on one of the trips, uh, it's actually the trip where I met Luis, who's awesome, and I'm still in touch with him. But basically, I saw in one of the adjacent valleys these mounds that, when I looked from Google Earth, it looked like they were facing north northeast, which is, typically how a lot of the old pyramids or temples were aligned to honor the sunrise when it came up on the solstice. And it's like these things look like they aligned in that direction. Let me check it out. So I get there and I'm walking through. I had to walk through a little river and walk through this farmland, and all of a sudden I came across this guy working. And this guy came across me and he got scared too. He told me he was I think I say it in the long form of the video. He thought it was people from the town coming to rob him, so he was really anxious. And
Is
but
that
then
a
we
food scarcity thing?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um I mean that's the thing. I mean part of the level of poverty that is in particularly those rural areas. It's heartbreaking. It's
Yeah, it is. I'll just point out too, and because I want you to finish your story, but I think it is cool that sometimes when you go to a place, you'll just happen to see someone there, and then they will sometimes just aid you. They become like your unofficial guide. I think that's really unique.
I that's honestly uh one of the best aspects of this is encountering the local every local I came across was friendly and helpful. And and this gentleman Luis in particular at this site he lived, that's his property, so he lived on this site. It turns out it was a site called Caballete, and and there was probably a Ministry of Culture sign somewhere in the vicinity. I just didn't see it, but he stopped what he was doing and he walked me through the entire site, and he knew the history of it, which was amazing because he was there when archaeologists came
Mm.
to explore it. And so I had this personal treasure trove of information of firsthand accounts of what was discovered, what's still buried under there, what the archaeologists left behind. Um and at that location was a monolithic stone calendar.
Yes.
And I had no idea. This is the only stone monolithic calendar system in the entire Norte Chico Supe area. And it being attributed to the same culture, it's very well possible that it is the oldest monolithic stone calendar in the Americas, which is just amazing.
Yeah, it looks like a little mini Stonehenge.
Yep. Yep.
Incredible.
Yeah, it was that was my second day. That was my
Yeah.
second day of the trip.
Yeah. I was definitely going to bring that up today. The fact that you found this stone calendar and it's associated with this culture that and these temples that I guess date back to, I don't know, 5,000 years ago.
3,200, 32 to 38.
Okay. And they're 1,000 years before the pyramids of Giza and well, the date that
Right.
mainstream is using for Giza. But still, I mean, if we're going by the books, it's an older site by 1,000 years.
Which is, it just adds to the point. You have these different cradles of civilization in the world, Mesopotamia and Sumer and Ur, and um, this puts the Americas having something comparable.
Absolutely. That's what fires me up about the history of the Americas is stuff just like this. It's like, wow, we've got a culture here that's older potentially than Egypt. And I was reading somewhere about Supe because when I saw it on your channel, I went to kind of look it up and just see a couple things about it. And one of the accounts I read did say it was a 5,000-year-old city. I think they said at least 5,000 years old. And yet, of course, that's that person's opinion. But I also saw that I think at one point they were doing excavations at Supe, but now it's just abandoned.
Oh yeah.
So when you show up, it's just there's nobody. You're the only person there, and unless you find locals that are living nearby. And I was going to ask you: is that the temple that's associated with Supe?
Yes. So Corral, it's the Supe Valley, the Supe River.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so Corral is, and so it's actually, so you have the river going from the Andes down to the coast, and feeding out into the ocean. And right there on the ocean, you have a site called Aspero. And then about 10 to between 10 and 20 kilometers inland, you have Corral. Corral is the main site of the Corral Supe culture, which is also the Norte Chico culture. It's the same thing. But that site of Aspero on the coast is built with that same circular plaza
Plaza,
of
yes.
those ones over here. And now there's evidence that these guys were trading. They were actually trading fish from the coast with like the agriculture they were doing at Corral, the site Corral was cotton. They were growing cotton and they were actually
Wow.
making nets. So they were making nets for the people on the coast who were then giving them the fish for the net. That's what the research
Yeah.
is saying.
Well, that temple there is, I guess since it's partially excavated, it looks, you get a good idea of what it would have looked like. It's it's better than just a pile of rubble. You could see lines and especially that it looks like they definitely excavated that circular
Plaza.
plaza. But it's amazing. You've got this, it's a really big temple. And then you've got the stone calendar associated with it, which is, I didn't mean to get us off of that, but because that's a heck of a find, man. Oh, I was going to ask you, did you find out anything about that elephant stone near that?
So he all I knew, this is a hard thing. And so what I'll usually end up doing when I do my research, and this actually happened after the fact. So I was looking for information to when I was actually making the content to put on YouTube. I wanted to find some archaeological journals that reference Caballete and and so I'm looking through peer reviewed journals and you don't really find that much. You really got to dig for things. And so all that being said, all I really had from the elephant stone that was in the middle of all these temples was Luis's experience, and he said that they thought it was meteorite, but it actually
Oh,
turns out it was volcanic stone.
okay. Okay.
So, but
S-
that's all.
but still, do you think that it had been manipulated to look that way?
There were the fact that it's volcanic. I haven't really reflected on it until this moment. There were or like hammer marks from people with like rocks. You could see that all throughout the top and the side of the stone, but the front of it just had these such smooth curves that then there were no hammering of anything in there. It was just smooth curves and it was almost like Play-Doh.
Yeah.
And I'm just reflecting on it now. I could see, I mean, if it was a volcanic stone and lava affected it somehow, it could make that. I'm not a geologist, so I don't really know.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
but I would imagine, you have lava moving through something. I say that to say those parts of that front of that stone was so smooth and fluid. It was just very
Yeah,
strange.
it's cool. It's cool. Maybe it just happens to look like an elephant, but it would be interesting if it was meant to look like an elephant, because that would be like, okay, did they have elephants in the area at one point, or I'm sure they had mammoths at one point, but just like that's just a fascinating find. I just I think that just that stone calendar is so cool, and it lines up with the solstices. I'm
Well,
I'm
the
assuming.
temp, I'm sure that calendar. That's why I was really looking for uh, documentation on it. I'm
Yeah.
sure that calendar aligns to a lot more things. The temples themselves were facing that northeast direction.
Have you seen the Michigan? They call it the Michigan Stonehenge. It's under Lake Michigan right
I
now.
I I vaguely remember uh, looking at that
It's
years
not.
ago.
It's not. It's not too far off from that.
No,
So anyway, just throwing that in there.
no, I mean, that's a
Of
very good point. That's a very good point.
course, I don't know. I'm looking at underwater images that somebody took. Who knows how far away they were? It's hard to gauge how big that site is since it's under a lake. But speaking of mammoths, I've heard some people postulate that Michigan Stonehenge was a mammoth killing circle, where I think they would hang, when you like a hunter when he shoots a deer, they hang it as as part of the butchering process.
Yeah.
And I guess mammoths were so big they had to put them up on these stone. This is the theory that they had to hang them up on stone.
I can only imagine how many people it would take to lift a mammoth to maneuver it properly.
That's I know. I was thinking, I'm like, how did they? But how did they do anything? How did they get the big stones there in the first place? So they had
Yeah,
some
well,
sort. But this
that's
is what fascinates me about the Americas is these kind of sites, man. It's so cool that you found that calendar circle. I'm just like I'm like a super fan about that. That made me so happy that you found that thing.
I'm glad. I'm glad. I mean, it was definitely one of the I mean, what I had no expectations going into this.
Yeah.
And so in particular the people I came across, the little nuances at the sites, the and even the shocking burials and
Mhm.
beautiful pottery at these things. Just everything was um again, I went in there with no expectations.
Yeah. So when you went to Corral Supe, did you from there go and find an unknown city using Google Earth?
I found an undocumented temple,
Nice.
for sure. Yeah, and I'm hesitant to say city because I don't really
Okay.
know what the adjacent structure was.
Sure.
But yeah, that was one of them, and that was no survey markers, no. Of course, the locals knew. When I got lost and I asked them, I said, "Hey, hey, I'm looking for these ruins. Do you know where they're like, yeah, back that way.
Yeah.
And so that's also why Louis said that a former site was a real blessing because ironically enough, at the majority of these locations, the locals will know of the site, but they won't know the history behind it. That's what I was finding. You
What
might have
about
to
legends? Do they have any kind of legends?
some if you end up coming across some of the elders and things of that nature, but for sure, uh the majority of places I ended up going to, I was so incredibly isolated that there wasn't a local village or town
Yeah.
nearby.
That kind of picked. I think the viewer might see that. I think I picked up on that because you are out there in these very isolated, remote regions, and a lot of times it's just you.
I mean, there were a couple of places I had to turn back from to because I realized, like in the moment in one of the videos, I'm scaling that mountain to
Yeah.
go see the fortress, and uh, so I scaled that thing, and I got to the top, and I just knew over the ridge over there was something. I knew it's where it was supposed to be. But after climbing that thing, I was like, it was such a steep drop, and I had to make a few calls a couple times where I turned back because I was by
Mhm.
myself.
Right.
No satellite signal, and I mean, just to speak to the isolation aspect of it, I mean, some of it was a bit irresponsible. You know what
Well,
I mean?
you take risks and you take risks to do this sort of thing, I imagine. I mean, it's and I that comes through too. I think people are picking up on that you're doing some things that you normally wouldn't do for the sake of exploration. And we're talking about northern Peru on the coast. And that's a region I didn't know a whole lot about. So I'm happy you went there because of that. And it seems like it seems like there's a lot of just isolated coast out there.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I went Nazca's in the south, but
Sure.
then I ended up going all the way up, towards Chiclayo and the Lambayeque region, which is, 12, 14 hours from Lima. Uh, but yeah, up and down the coast, so you have the coast and Peru's unique. I mean, it's a coastal desert,
Hmm.
and then you start I mean, especially in the south, it's desert, and then you start to go up into the Andes. Along the a little bit north, it's the coast, and then you get these fertile valleys going up to the desert, or I
Hmm.
mean, going up to the Andes. And so, and the thing about a lot of the cultures being right there on the coast is they would be inundated by these massive El Niños over time. And I mean, it still happens to this day. Even the whole towns are wiped out. It's
Yeah.
I mean, it gets bad. And so, and then every couple, you know, hundreds of years, you'll get a major, massive one that just completely eradicates anyone or anything that was there. So the prominent theories are you would have these cultures that would build their structures, get hit by one of these climate events, and then move further up into the Andes where it was, presumably safer. And several hundred years go by and they start to trickle back and live on the coast more.
Hmm.
And another thing happens. And so there's that cycle for thousands of years. And so a
Hmm.
lot of times what you'll end up finding is sites that were there that get built on by a later culture and then
Hmm.
built on by another later culture. And so, and that's why, so a lot of the newer archaeology stuff that's happening with dating is so fascinating to me because I think people are, even in the mainstream, I think that they're starting to see that some of the dating they had might have just been that, top one or
Top
two
layer.
levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and when I was thinking northern Peru, I was thinking about, I should have specified, I was thinking about the Moche
Oh, the Moche, yeah.
Moche Valley. I'm thinking about, of course, Supe and Crow, Moche, and Chan Chan, which
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know much about Chan Chan until I came across your channel. And this one is amazing because I love a good mystery, right? So I looked into that city, and it looks like it was there were people there called the
Chimu, yeah.
Chimu, and they apparently, like, because it's right there on the ocean, so they had these ocean and sea deities. And I looked at some of their pottery and some of their relics, and I saw several depictions of men riding giant fish. I thought that was interesting, but the language is a mystery. And
Yeah.
it looked like they had, well, one of the interesting legends I came across was that the history of these people started with the arrival of this guy, Te Kainamo. He arrived from the sea. The legend has it he came from the sea on a balsa raft, and that he came to the Moche Valley and populated it. But I just found it interesting that he came not by land but by boat from the Pacific.
Oh, yeah. And so there's also and I'd have to look into this because either the names are interchangeable or it's a culture just a little north.
Camo, take Canamo,
I
something like
think
that.
Nilap or Nimelap, NY, same thing,
Okay.
same myth.
Okay. Okay.
That is foreigners came from the sea, arrived on the boats with a little bit of a congregation, it seems, and then set up
Mm.
shop, kind of became the rulers, would teach the systems of agriculture and things of that nature. I'm not particularly would the exact one you're referencing has some vague familiarity to me, but
Hmm.
it's so funny because I know the one I'm talking about is like just a little further up north, so it's
Yes.
probably the same thing. Um,
Yes.
and then
Well, that's a lot of areas in South America. I've come across a similar legend actually, where if you go back far enough, it seems like people came from the ocean and arrived by sea. I,
that's what a lot of the
even
legends say.
even that book I have, Discoveries and Conquest of Mexico, when the Spanish showed up in the 1500s, they were finding abandoned cities even then, or it looked like people had been wiped out or had migrated somewhere. But they were looking into the cultures, and some of the people in the 1500s who were still there said that they were predated by a culture who came from somewhere across the ocean.
Yep. That's You see it up and down the coast in Mesoamerica. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a very you know, you got places hundreds of miles apart, kind of saying something similar.
Yeah. But
Might
that
be.
that site of Chan Chan is amazing.
Oh, it's vast. I think gosh, I forget the statistics on it, but the number of square miles it's just it's shocking.
It's
It is.
safe to call that one an ancient city, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And I mean, in comparison, it's not as ancient as the stuff like where we've been taught, like Corral and stuff. This is more modern,
Yeah.
um, in comparison, of course.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was a bustling metropolis. I actually have some drone footage that I've got so much footage I'm working on
Yeah.
putting out there. But it is. I mean, you can see it. I mean, there's pictures, and even from Google Earth, you can see the complexity of this. It's a major bustling metropolis.
It looked like they had huge open air markets
Yep.
inside of the city walls. I think they're city walls because there's one video of you and you're walking up against this wall and it just seems to not end. I don't know if that's some sort of a channel or what.
That was it's funny. I have it on video somewhere. I got freaked out because I couldn't find my way out. It
Yeah,
was like a maze. I
like a
couldn't find my
maze.
way, and I started to get a little anxious in that moment because there were it's like an old school hedge maze or something
Yeah,
like
it was like
that.
walls on each side of you, I
Huge.
think.
And
That's
it's all
crazy.
beige. It's all made of the Adobe sand and or Adobe bricks. But it was and that's the and what you saw in that was just one of the many right there in the area.
Hmm.
And you saw how huge that was. There's bigger ones right there.
Wow. And is it part of that? Is it part of Chan Chan?
Part of Chan Chan. Yeah. So I think I'd have to look it up, but I want to say it's a shocking amount of square miles that
I
things
wonder
like
I wonder how big that was compared to like maybe one of our modern cities because it seems like it was big enough to scale it to something modern.
oh yeah, no, by yes it was.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Well, you also have a video where you're using the word megalopolis.
Mm.
It's very windy in the video. You're up on a mountain, you're overlooking like I think a undiscovered city with pyramids is what it looks like.
So I would find out later that I had a friend from the channel send me this location, and I did some research. And I was like, these have the right alignments. These look like pyramids. They look like massive stone pyramids. Uh, and so that was like the final destination I went to on the coast. And when I got back, number one, getting there was a journey beyond belief. It is on the channels, but I had to
Yeah, yeah,
navigate
we should probably
through.
tell people that you spend like thousands of dollars in gas to do
Oh yeah,
this, to pull this stuff off.
yeah. So,
And you cover a lot of ground.
so on that note, go to pillarsofthepast.com. Please support.
Yes, there you go.
uh,
Yeah.
I mean, it was yeah. Just to touch on that, I mean, this that's bad. This was the dream of mine,
Hmm.
and I, you know, threw my whole self at it and everything I had into it. And so, hopefully it's like Field of Dreams here.
Yeah. No, I think that yeah, it's not lost on people how, how important this is and how unique this is. And I know you're sacrificing a lot to do what you do when you go out there. Like I'm imagining that you're getting up early and you're having long days and people get tired from a two to 3 day road trip. It will absolutely exhaust someone. So, you know, it's a testament to what you do to think about it in the parameters of this is like a 30-day road trip. That's just
90,
nonstop travel, and you're trying to get, and you're probably getting lost and all, and you're probably having all the emotions of a normal road trip where you're somewhere you've not been before oftentimes. So yeah, I mean it's not it's a heck of an undertaking, man. I think that shines through.
uh, I'll tell you what though, I felt the most alive,
Yeah.
and it was just it felt like everything I wanted to be doing
Yeah.
at every single moment.
Yeah.
But speaking about that site, I get there, and these are pyramids. These are old pyramids. And what I would find upon my return is that there actually was an archaeological survey done at this site. So it's not, I didn't discover them. Uh, However, that survey was from the 1970s, and it was one of those sites where they did a brief survey on it. They got some dates and kind of moved on.
Hmm. Did they name it anything?
Hurulin,
Huh.
Hurulin, and it is my personal belief that with further dating, these things are likely going to be a lot older than what they're currently dated at because this was a pre-ceramic culture. This wasn't stone blocks being built and put together like corral. I would even say it might go back further than corral, because this was carved out of the bedrock itself for the most part. And it is a complex of 15 to 18 pyramids. The coolest thing I found there was so there were these two big stones that I mean it just looked weird on Google Earth. So I was like, let me go check this place out. And so I start going there and I come through this back way and I find out these two big stones, they're carved out of the bedrock, just the same way those pyramid structures were. But they're clearly carved. They're clearly like the mountain cut down, and there's a gap between them. And I'm like, all right, this is a little strange. Like astronomical alignments. Let me pull out my compass, and it is facing due east. It just due east. And so you got these two stone slabs, and then it leads into this little alcove between these mountains. And I saw on Google Earth, it looked like little looting pits. So like that's strange. So I went there and saw the alignment, saw the looting pits, and it was clear like this was a purposed necropolis
Mm.
because, and it had to be for the elite because there was also a burial site a little further down, but just out in the open. This one was tailored for some sort of specific reason. And I mean, it was just incredible. I didn't expect that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a heck of a find. And you said did it have a circular plaza there?
No, 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 no.
Oh, this one did not.
So
Okay.
these none of these did. And they were more so you had like the base was like a long rectangle, and then you had a smaller little rectangle, and then a square up top. So
Yeah.
typically each one had three layers.
Yeah, I remember seeing that part. Uh I'm 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 confusing that site with another one you found because with that Corral Supe site, they do have the stone circular plaza there, and I just thought it was interesting that that becomes like an identifier for you in later searches because you'll go on Google search, it seems like, and you'll see what will look like just a normal top of a mountain, but you'll see that circle, and you're like,
That's
oh,
the
that,
undocumented one that I
yeah,
found.
yeah,
That
yeah,
was
okay,
and that's what told me it was. I mean, it looked like a pile of rubble, a huge pile of rubble
yeah,
until I got there, and then all of a sudden I'm finding looting pits and pottery and bones, and like people had dug
yeah.
out this temple. So
This one, that one's completely undocumented.
completely
That
undocumented.
you, I was going to get to that because, yeah,
Yeah, and that's I mean it's still I'm still trying to navigate through the proper channels and trying to as the channel builds, the contacts build as well, and so figuring out the right approach and method and who to reach out to in the ministry for things of that nature. You know, but again, I'm speaking to Dr. Barnhart. The thing about
Yeah.
Peru is there is so much out there.
Yeah.
There's so much, so many ancient structures, so many
Yeah.
ancient cultures, and it's they've got their hands full with what they've got
Yeah,
already.
it's vast. I just saw the other day in a video, the guy was showing a pre-Inca stone calendar that's right off of Lake Titicaca.
Hmm.
And it's a megalithic stone calendar, but where some of the stones have fallen down, but there's enough there where you could tell what it was, and it aligns up with the solstices and everything. And I was just like, wow, it was one of these sites you never hear anybody talk about, and I think it does speak to the vastness of Peru.
And it's thousands and thousands of years. And where you're talking about, Lake Titicaca, that's on the border of Peru and Bolivia,
Yes.
that's way up in the Andes.
Mhm.
So you got everything in the Andes, and then you got everything on the coast, and you got everything in the Amazon that we still haven't been able to touch.
Yeah.
It is there is so much there.
Yeah.
It's
Which Graham Hancock is doing us a good service with putting the information out there about the Amazon, with using lidar and all that, and we're able to see that wow, there were civilizations here. You could see the remnants of them, and I think too, we should tell people the guy that you just interviewed was on Ancient Apocalypse 2 with Graham Hancock.
yeah.
So congratulations on that interview. I mean, I think you told me you've only done two interviews and he's one of them. So that was excellent.
Yeah, no, Dr. Barnhart is great, and I couldn't appreciate his time more and his insight more. He is a wealth of knowledge, and his
He blew my mind going into the mathematics of the ancient
oh man,
cultures.
he's brilliant, brilliant individual.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that interview will be out hopefully soon. Um, but also just he recognizes the field he's in. He has a job to do, and but I think he also handles uh, the questions that are out there. Also, I think he handles them very well too.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and as far as like when evidence starts to come in, there's a lot of people in the field um who keep needing more and more and more
Sure,
evidence
sure.
to have their minds changed. But then there's
Yes.
other out there who are a bit more receptive to these things.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a struggle. There's always going to be people that just are going to need more. No matter how good the evidence is, and no matter how solid your case is, there's always going to be the naysayers out there, and I know that can get very frustrating. But I am looking forward to that interview with him.
Yeah, it was. I mean, and he's a wealth of information and knowledge.
Yeah.
Particularly his I mean I when I spoke with him we kind of stayed focused on South America, but his work on Central America and especially in North America, there is so much here in North America that I mean just from the Spanish chronicles and people going up the Mississippi River, and I mean
Yeah.
you're seeing bustling cities of tens of thousands of people every couple hundred like miles. This was a huge, vast network,
Yes.
and so
Thank you, because I've been trying to tell people that on here lately. I'm trying to
yeah,
tell people that there were cities here, and
oh
they
yeah,
were using that Mississippi like a giant superhighway.
oh yeah, and the thing about it is, again, to touch on things in the Amazon, for example, you're probably not really going to find stone there that people were using stone. And so whatever people were using to build with, whether it is the earthworks or maybe foundational, who knows? but over time, things have disintegrated. Here in North America, you're not really seeing a lot of stone built temples, but you are seeing the mounds. And from the Spanish chronicles, those mounds were typically pyramidal shape. And then there was another one on top and another one on top. And then that's where you would have these thatched buildings,
Hmm.
and where people would live.
Yeah.
And so, but the amount of people that the Spanish ran into that's documented is just shocking. I had no idea, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. The platform mounds over here draw striking resemblance to what most people would think of as a pyramid,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and just the way they were built and everything. And like, I had a guy on who was talking about a site, I think it was in Newark, Ohio, that with mounds and I think maybe some geoglyphs, and they got into that site and realized that whoever built it had knowledge of advanced trigonometry.
That's impressive.
You know, that's
Yeah, I
that's in
mean, I
Ohio.
don't doubt it. I don't doubt
So
it. I mean, it's
I wonder how much of that knowledge came up from South America, honestly. Of course, that's, I mean, I'm speculating a little bit here, but I see there's on the coast of Mexico, there was, I'm blanking on the name, but there was a culture that had a little empire, and it looked like they had some sort of communication with people down on the coast of South America.
I mean, yeah, the Olmecs, the Aztec, the Maya. I'm sure there were a few other little cultures that peppered there. Uh,
Puripecha people.
sure, I'll have to look into that.
Yeah. They
Uh,
had an empire for a little bit, right down at the bottom, right before you get into Panama almost. They're right there on the coast, the Pacific coastline of Mexico. And a lot of their pottery looks just like some of the pottery we're finding, that you're finding as well, that you show on your channel in South America, especially in the museums and stuff. It looks, they had some sort of communication,
yeah, I
at
mean
least.
that's they had to. I would
Mhm.
think. I mean, there is uh evidence that some of the earliest pottery that's being found now is actually coming from you know the opposite coast in South America, the Majaro Islands.
Really?
And yeah, it's like 8,000-year-old pottery. And so the idea is that the pottery made its way through the Amazon, actually from that coast, because you're not seeing pottery on the uh, west coast of Peru until 1800 BCE.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I might be off a bit on that, but the dating on the pottery starts out there in the Amazon and it goes up to Ecuador. And then from Ecuador, it comes down the coast, but it also goes up the coast. And that's where it starts feeding into because Mesoamerica started doing pottery after the coast down in Peru, slightly after the coast.
Okay, wow. Yeah. There's a sign right there. Well, I got to ask you this. The undocumented site that we were just talking about that you found, do you have any theories on that? And, feel free to speculate. And, we could tell people it's just speculation. But I, I, you found this, you found this site, and I just think that I'd like to know like what was going through your mind when you found it. Did you have any instincts about maybe what happened there?
I felt like the site was abandoned.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, the way it looked, I mean, it looked like a rubble heap of just stones. And so, I mean, my first thought was, I don't know how big this thing was, but for it to all come crashing down like that. I mean, Peru is also on fault lines, so it could have been.
Mhm.
Like, my first thought was like probably an earthquake, but I'm not seeing like any landslides or anything like that.
Possible cataclysm, maybe.
That's, I mean, definitely
Yeah.
a possibility. It, I mean, especially in Peru being so in such a location of four earthquakes, but then also tsunamis, have come and devastated the especially those coastal regions. This was a little bit further inland, but when you have those El Niños and those storms coming in and out,
Hmm.
it can cause severe damage. Um, but what it was reduced to was, I mean, nothing but a pile of rubble. It was hard to tell that there was even a temple there. If
Yeah.
I hadn't told the circular plaza and then had the well, and then when I got there too, I mean, this is in the video too. In one of the looting pits, you can see there's walls
Hmm.
under there. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
so like, and that was, it's like, I wonder what this thing looks like. I mean,
Yeah.
there are stone walls built there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was thinking too when we were talking about how people move and pottery moves and all that. I watched recently the Chariots of the Gods, that old documentary. I love that documentary. And they show how that there's in Cusco, you've got the megalithic walls there, and there's one in Easter Island that looks just like one of the ones in Cusco. Looks like the same people built it, or at least they had the same knowledge. And that would kind of suggest that somebody from the islands came here to the Americas,
Well,
or maybe vice versa, who knows. But you went to Sacsayhuaman, so I know you've been in that area and everything. I was just curious, do you have
I,
anything to add to that story maybe? And I do kind of want to get into, if you would be willing to, your theory on how those blocks were maybe even constructed.
okay, definitely. So first, the new DNA stuff that's coming out is pretty awesome. That is starting to show, and it's still in its infancy, so to speak. But some of the data that's coming out shows a connection between I think it's called haplogroups in the DNA chromosome stuff. Um, I'm not a geneticist, but
Yeah, yeah.
from what I've read, there's connections between people in like Polynesia and even in the Asiatic areas, DNA relations from there into South America that you don't find in North America.
Mhm.
And so that, I mean, if that's accurate, then that would kind of call into question this whole migrating down from North America and
Sure.
across the land
The
bridge.
land bridge, yeah. Hmm.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, and now there's also evidence too that same DNA stuff. I mean, they're not talking to this direct connection, but you have the footprints in white sands, which are 23,000 years, and there's a handful of sites here in the United States that speak to human occupation far earlier than the last ice age.
Yeah.
So, um, but as far as the stones, and I mean, it's still one of the greatest mysteries. And I feel like I could have written a dissertation on with the research I did. I did not. I expected to just make a quick little video, and this thing turned into a month's worth of research and digging and investigating. Uh,
Yeah, I think you opened up with that one saying, "Hey, I fell down a rabbit hole here."
yeah, it was, and I couldn't stop. I
Yeah.
kept like trying to connect the dots, but I mean, this is just a theory, but some of the evidence like lined up. Some of the theories are from the Spanish chronicles from Garcilaso de la Vega and uh, Pedro Cieza de Leon. They talked about this, reddish mortar substance.
Yeah, for people listening, we're talking about these megalithic blocks in places like Cusco, where to this day nobody knows how they built these. They're
No, they're
huge.
huge. And some of them I think, are upwards of, 120 to 200 tons at Sacsayhuaman, for example. And you can't get a piece of paper in between them. The stones, they look fused together. You
Yeah.
look at the seams and you can't get anything in between them. And there have been, people have looked at it and almost say that in that apparent fusion, you can tell that, I guess, geologically some minerals like cross, and so it almost looks like these things were melted together in some way. Um, and I'll try to put it as briefly as I can. That rabbit hole I ended up going down, basically, there's this uh, it was a peer-reviewed paper that expanded on this, but essentially that there are substances that can chemically alter the surface of stone and kind of melt them a little bit. And in this research I did, they're thinking it was pyrite because the Incas or people prior to the Incas were probably familiar with what happened. They were great miners.
Hmm.
And so that chemical substance would kind of alter the shape of stone and allow it to be a bit malleable.
Wow.
Um, but there are other stories. So that was from
Well,
the Inca.
there's a bird. There's a part of this
Oh
story
yeah,
that
the
includes a bird, right?
yeah. So actually, Hiram Bingham, the guy who rediscovered Machu Picchu, wrote in his journals that he saw a bird take a leaf on a stone and peck at it, and all of a sudden the stone made a hole in the stone. Uh, Percy Fawcett, the explorer who got lost looking for the lost city of Z, also wrote about this bird. He actually there were three separate accounts of his, because in another one he writes how his nephew walked through this area with these reddish plants or walked through this area, and when he came out, his spurs had been melted. Um, and they asked the local guy, what happened, and he said, "Did you walk through an area with these red plants?" They were like, "Yeah, I did." It's like that's what ate your spurs.
Oh,
That's what the Incas used to build the stones and so from again, I'm not a scientist here, so I can't speak to the exact chemical process, but from what I learned, there some plants release something called oxalate, and the oxalate um, has these properties that can affect the surface mineralization of stone. And when you mix that with whatever substance might have been used that the Spanish chroniclers were describing, that would just speed up the process. And so all of a
incredible.
sudden, and this guy's research, his name is Helmut Tribuch, and it's a peer-reviewed paper, but the result of that effect leaves a layer on the stones of this glossy, shiny looking, what is called vitrification. It
Yeah.
almost looks like it, and I was finding that at Sacsayhuaman and all the different sites around the area.
Yeah,
So
you
there's
you
something to it.
show the examples of vitrification
Yeah.
on some of the edges of these blocks. I thought that was cool.
Yeah. I mean, the Quechua stories of legend and lore is that when the Spanish first got there and they asked the Inca who built these, that the response was, we don't know, it was already here. Now they weren't talking about Cuzco specifically in the chronicles. I found that out. I was
Mm,
under a misimpression there.
okay.
However, you
What
talk
were they what were they referring to?
to Tiwanaku
Yeah.
in Bolivia,
Cool.
um, right around the Lake Titicaca area. But most sites in Peru, you're going to find evidences of a former culture, and whether it's the direct antecedent culture or even further back, but typically a lot of, whether it was to pay homage or out of reverence, a lot of these locations were repurposed and reused. And
Hmm.
so it's a lot of times what you'll find with, things in Cusco, for example, you have these different layers of stonework. You got these huge megalithic stones, and then you got the imperial Inca stones, and then you got these little blocks on top. It would allude to different methods of construction, possibly from different cultures. Same thing happens on the coast. You'll have a repurposed temple that on one layer has, I might be getting the cultural dates wrong here, but for reference purposes, like Moche and then Chimu, perhaps, and or something, you'll have different layers. And so it's like maybe
Yes.
cultures were paying homage to sites of their predecessors.
Yes.
Or it was
Yep.
just a great location and they were like, we're going to use it now.
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. We're seeing that over here as well. Uh, there was one in particular I was reading about this week. The Delaware peoples have a record of going to war with the Allegheny, and
Hmm.
they call them the Allegheny. And they said that the Allegheny were tall in they were tall, they were like giants, I guess, and they built these mounds. So they were building fortified mounds on the Ohio and Allegheny River, probably right where Pittsburgh is today.
Interesting.
So, but they were somewhere in between. The Allegheny were this older culture, right? They were either the remnants of the old culture before the Native Americans, or they're somewhere right in between. But but they knew how to build the mounds, so it points back to
To
that
that,
older era, right?
yeah.
That epoch of. So yeah, it always just gets, yeah, Graham Hancock. Just things keep getting older, right? And I think we see that a lot. But at in one of your videos at Sacsayhuaman, there's a corner of one of these megalithic walls, and there's a snake impression there.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you theorized, or you point out that it looks like they had scooped.
I mean, I'm not like just from simple
Yeah,
observation purposes, it looked like, I mean, when you scoop some ice cream out of the thing,
right,
you,
right.
you end up having like a lip, and
Yeah, yeah.
it looked like someone took a scooper in that stone and just kind of scooped it out. It's
It,
possible it was chiseled, but I mean, just if you
yeah,
talk to a 5-year-old and you ask him or her what it looks like, they're gonna say it looks like everyone's getting ice cream.
yeah. I saw that, and I wonder too. I'm like, I wonder if they had some more colorful rocks or gems in there at one point. They got popped out.
Interesting theory. I never thought about that.
Because it is a snake, and it looks like something was in the rock to
Yeah.
I guess, like, further artistically depict a snake.
Yeah. Well, and then I mean, there's all sorts of. I mean, that was a unique one because that was like right when you walk up. Um, the interesting thing about Sacsayhuaman is, right across from it, in the same complex, right across from it, you have this sister hill thing that is, uh, forget geologically what happened to it, but there you could see like there were clear geometric lines and steps and seats cut directly into the bedrock. And so my personal thought is, so you have these cultures cutting right into the bedrock, but then you have stone being built here. It would almost seem like two different cultures, and this was a site that had some sort of reverence or some sort of value that the subsequent culture. It's like this is where we're going to build. This is because it does have a different feeling to it.
Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. I did I hear you refer to the circular plaza as a serpent circular plaza a couple times?
I
No. Okay. Maybe I heard that somewhere else. Uh, I was just going to ask you if there was serpent iconography involved with some of these sites.
um not at any of the Supe Corral. So that's the frustrating thing about those sites in particular. There is no iconography
Mhm.
whatsoever. Um, it's and like at the oldest sites, it does not appear like there is very much iconography, but you'll see the serpent throughout different cultures up and down the coast for
Mhm.
sure. I mean, it was definitely a venerated being.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, one of the feelings I walked away with from watching your stuff and your work and your research is that it, we know very little about the past, just because of how, I mean, a lot of the places you're going to are abandoned excavations or just not excavated at all. And by the time I saw on your journey where you got to Huaca del Sol, which I love that. I want to talk about that a little bit. But by the time you got to that area, I was thinking, wow, it just kind of hit me that we just know very little about these people and what happened. And, but because you've got these pyramids on the beach out there, which I think is so cool. And I think you said that one of them was just not excavated at all.
Yeah. No, there were several places that. So again, going back to actually in that survey of that site that I found on the coast,
Mhm.
there's an image of a chamber in one of these pyramids that so my best guess is that in order to get the dates or get it on record when these old antiquarian archaeologists would discover something, they would dig at a piece of things, get it documented, label it, maybe get some dates, and then move on.
Mhm.
Very brief, very because there's so much in Peru. And really, typically, unless they were finding riches, they're not spending that much time researching things. They're not spending that much time digging unless it is known that there is something there. Um, and so it makes me think that at a bunch of the places I went to, you would find this little area dug out, or that little area dug out, but then that's it. But in those areas, you can see that there's a whole structure underneath the entire area, and I think it's just a matter of funding and interest, really.
Yes. Yeah, I thought that too. Like some of the sites you went to, I had that thought as well. I'm like, there's there's got to be a lack of interest at play here because, and that's tied into finance somehow, because it takes money and resources to put people out there to do these excavations. And essentially out there, what we're talking about is like basically like uncovering ancient places, because a lot of them seem to be just underneath the surface of the sand, or it's because it is like a desert climate in parts of Peru there, like you pointed out. A lot of that is just covered by sand or whatever the soil type is there. So excavation means you got to go in and dig.
You got to go and dig, and then you're probably, you're staying out in remote areas, and you got to have a team and all sorts of things, and hopefully, when technology gets better, it'll allow us to penetrate things more, and it just makes me think though, like, what is there that we could learn from? What is it
Well,
wasn't
that's the thing.
until
It's underground. There's no telling.
there's no telling. And I mean, even at the site of Huaca Prieta down on the coast of Peru, for the longest time they knew it was, about 6,000 years old, until Tom Dillahay recently in this generation went down there and was like, all right, well, you guys took dates from this front part of the structure. Why don't we take dates from the back part? So they took dates, and this say it's like 15,000, 18,000 years old. They're finding the oldest evidence of corn there.
Hmm.
Um, and that's accepted now. It's 15,000, at minimum. And how many other sites should we be doing that at?
Well,
You know what I
yeah,
mean?
with Huaca, there's a moment that you captured where I think you had to take a tour that you didn't want to take, but
Oh yeah,
that was the only way they're going to let you in. So you're kind of doing your own thing, but kind of still part of this tour. But there was a part there, I think, where you say we're on top of a buried city or structure or something. There's a whole complex there that's under that, but to the naked eye, you would think it's just a beach.
Well, but when you get up top to the top of I think to the top of one of the outlooks there,
Yeah.
you can see, and it all depends on the weather and the wind and what time of year it is, but you can see the little indentations
Yeah. Okay.
where things are.
I can see that.
And so I mean, and that's all over
Yeah.
Peru. I mean, it is. Uh,
Did you go to those when you were a kid? Those pyramids there?
I did. I actually have home footage of being on top of Huaca del Sol because back
Awesome.
then, you know, it was
You didn't
uh,
have to take the tour back
you
then.
didn't have to take the tour there.
Yeah. That's cool, man. I would, yeah, it just popped in my head that you had said that you had a childhood memory about that. That's cool.
Yeah. And I still have all that old family footage too. I mean, it's on those old high eight tapes, but I mean, that's when it's when the adventure started, you know.
Yeah,
So this is
yeah.
just kind of a continuation of it.
What a sight, though, man. Just those, I guess, can we call them pyramids? They're
They
pyramids,
are.
pyramids on the beach.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, we don't hear about that.
No,
I never hear
and
anybody
that
talk about that.
that's what was like shocking to me because it is literally a um and so when I got there, I was a little downhearted because I did see survey sticks and I was like, oh, they've been here. But then I did the research and I was like, all right, they were here 50 years ago at this point, yeah, and how much did they do? But I mean, this is 18, you know, 15 to 18 pyramids in this one little section. I mean, you would think you'd want to research this location as much as possible. Now, I guarantee for a fact what happened was, and it didn't have to even be a major storm. It could have been a little light, gentle one, but
Yeah,
these people were right on the coast. You know what I mean? And so the other thing about it, this place was not easy to get to at all. You know, it was a struggle and a half to get there. So, you know, you could get the funding, but then there's a whole bunch of logistic stuff that needs to happen too. And then you gotta have people willing to do it. Uh,
mm. Is it cut off by back roads or something, or is there mountains or what?
it's mountains. It's just navigating. It's really a kind of brilliant place because it's right along one of the rivers too. It's also based on the time of the season. Like I couldn't
Yeah.
go a certain way because the river had flooded the street and there was no way cars were
Oh,
getting through there. Um, and so I managed to find some very backwards way, and then I had to hike for hours to get there. Yeah.
yeah. Maybe that was an area that was good fortification for them, like easily defensible or something.
And that's definitely a thought too.
Hmm.
You know, but being right there on the coast, the I had an intuitive moment just kind of walking through the dunes to get there where and again, this is intuitive, not science backed
Sure.
at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. No problem.
Uh, but there were so many little paths through this dune that it almost felt like this was a pilgrimage site. And really based on the fact that you have all these different temples and structures, it would seem logical that this would be some sort of very important place. Um, Now I
I
do
had
believe that
I had the
survey.
same thought about some of the. Sorry to interrupt, but I had the same thought about some of the higher elevation sites that you went to. When you're on top of the mountain, like questioning, should I even be here for safety reasons? Like, I was wondering if those might be
So
sites as
those
well.
those ones up in the mountains, typically, maybe a handful, a couple of them are known observatories. They have astronomical alignments.
Wow.
But there was a period of time in Peruvian history where um, you know, religion starts to come about really from the Chavin culture. That's at least when you start to see religious iconography. And then when they fall, you start to have warfare between all these different clans and tribes and groups, and especially along the coast. So I think in part, well, and a lot of them are called fortresses, but they could be for worship and things of that nature. But it is said that and you can look on Google Earth too. A lot of them are placed in strategic locations, and then you'll see a little city nearby or a little ruins of what might be a city. So it almost does feel like they could have been lookouts, for neighboring clans trying to come for their goods.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
it's
that
also based on the
actually,
fact that they had to come up from the coast, and if they
yeah.
had just been wiped out, they're going to want to build high.
Yeah. I had a gentleman on who was talking about line of sight communication, where they were very much utilizing some of these high points, and they were watching the sea a lot of times. And if somebody was coming across the ocean, they could translate that message miles into the interior of the country. And he speculates that they were using mica, which has a reflective quality.
Oh,
So somebody's up on a lookout and they've got mica and they're able to signal with the sun. And then it shoots over to a guy, however far away, miles away. And then he
signals
further,
the next one.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, that would it would be operationally sound.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It speaks to the ancient mind and the ancient techniques. They knew how to do things that we probably can't even dream of. There's there's just so much untapped history here. I think Peru, the coasts of Peru, it's just full of mystery cities and civilizations. And I think it might even hold partial history to North America. You know, I wonder if some of these coastal civilizations, I wonder how far up the coast they got. I wonder if they were communicating with people not only in Mexico, but maybe up into the coast of California, because I know that some of the Northwest native art from here in the Americas, or North America, resembles art from Peru.
Well, you can see, I've often wondered the same thing, and I just wish we could find the little nuggets of evidence that could really, like, lock that in.
Yeah,
Until then it's just speculation, but hey, everything is speculation until you find the evidence.
sure.
But I mean, I personally don't see any reason why that. I mean, I don't know the dates on when they're finding like little canoes and things of that nature, even, in China, for example. But there's no reason why people couldn't have been hugging the coast to travel places. If you don't want to go as far as saying that they were out in the big broad ocean, well, I mean, you could still be pretty close to the coast and get a good distance.
Yeah,
Catch the
yeah.
right current.
I mean, in scripture, I know that I was looking into the city of Tyre, and I think when Solomon was working with Hiram of Tyre to build Solomon's temple, uh, they were transporting cedars from Tyre, which is a port city on the Mediterranean, down, hugging the coast, and bringing those cedars down to Joppa. And so there's an example where they were hugging the coastline to communicate with cities further north,
Yeah.
in the Middle East, at least.
I mean, there's no, again, you think of these cradles of civilization in the Middle East, and I mean, you have them everywhere, and there's, I mean,
And it looks like the cradle of civilization in the Middle East resembles the cradle of civilization, the Gulf of Mexico.
well, and, and
Yeah.
so and so there's, and plus, I think there's also the intuitive human adventurous spirit, and whether it was for adventure or for necessity, like exploration is happening on some level.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I was looking at a map the other night and it kind of struck me. It's a little bit of a stretch, but if you look at Turkey, the Black Sea, and some of the other bodies of water around Turkey, and if you were to move the map like this, it looks like the Great Lakes, like Michigan and the Great Lakes. And I don't even know what that would mean. If it doesn't mean anything really. It's just interesting that you had these cultures over there like Turkey, like Istanbul. I think that was just this center of culture. It was Constantine, right? Or Constantinople, and it was the center of culture for throughout the Dark Ages. While Europe is plunged into this abyss of the Dark Ages, Turkey is thriving. They're having their own renaissance there, and they're utilizing those waterways. They're on the lakes and the seas over there, and they've got this thriving Mediterranean culture going on there. And I think that maybe something similar to that was going on here at one point when you look at the Great Lakes.
Interesting.
And I think maybe a lot of that was fueled by copper mining and other resources that they were interested in.
I mean, that it's a
It's
it's
just
a
a
good
theory,
theory. I mean, yeah, there's just when you're talking about the trade networks and the thriving, bustling societies, just to go back to Peru, just thinking about all these cultures on the coast that, kilometers apart that are trading fish for cotton and all sorts of different things. There are vast networks happening. And then there's even been some stuff to suggest that a lot of the iconography also that from Mesoamerica there are some potential similarities going down into South America, and then also um, some of the gold artifacts that you'll find in the museums in Mesoamerica share similarities with things down in South America. So, I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to think that there was
You've got
some sort
that
of contact and
has
communication.
yeah, absolutely. You've got that Aztec blue as well.
The
There's a color of blue, and I'm a little hazy on the details here, but I believe it was found in here in Mississippi or Alabama. They found artifacts that had were using this color. They were coloring relics with blue,
Interesting.
and they traced the blue back to the Aztecs somehow.
Oh wow. I have not heard about that, but
Yeah.
that would
Uh,
be something.
so yeah, there was some communication here, and not to mention, like, you know, they were. I think that they were traveling by boat. I think ancient man was using the waterways and was using boats probably way earlier than we give them credit for.
Well, I mean, you think about how were they catching all these fish?
Yeah,
I mean, unless I mean, maybe fish were a lot closer to the shore back then. And but I mean,
I
as far
think they
as
had boats, man. Every time I turn around, somebody's finding an older boat.
yeah, and that's again, I think that I don't know. I've recently come to this theory that oh, I mean, we're living in this new technological age. We have all this new tech equipment to help us identify things like LiDAR and all the ground penetrating things. And so this is like, people have been exploring forever.
Mhm.
I feel like we're in this new modern age of exploration that is still kind of in its infancy. And like we're really figuring out how this technology can be used and get the best results and then starting to apply it. And so I think things are just going to continuously be found.
I agree. I
That
agree. I'm excited for that too.
Yeah,
I feel like we're on a frontier of sorts under the broader umbrella of archaeology. It just seems like we're definitely at a frontier here where we're going to continue to find more and more things that are going to help us perceive our past, I think, a little bit clearer. Maybe challenge some of the narratives that are in place, and hopefully we can keep an open mind and welcome in all the new discoveries that are found
I mean
from here
we
going forward. I think your channel has a part in this this new frontier of archaeology. That's why I wanted to have you on, because you're doing outlaw stuff. I love having outlaws on my show, and
Love it.
you're very humble about it. You're not, you're quick to tell people, "Hey, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a geologist," and I appreciate that. But you're still doing outlaw stuff, and I think you're helping to push things forward into the light. So I appreciate that, and moving into a part of the show where maybe we're going to wind down a little bit here. I do want to ask you this: how many abandoned cities or places do you think that you found?
Oh, I mean, the count is over 90 for sure, probably over 100. And
Wow.
that was just in the, oh, I mean, that was feet on the ground. If you're
Yes.
talking about my satellite mapping,
I was talking about feet on the ground,
feet on the
but
ground, it's been at least 90.
incredible. But
Yeah.
so you've got more that you haven't got to yet.
Oh man,
Sounds like.
I've I amassed 2 terabytes worth of footage. I mean, eh, eh, now granted, a third of that is unusable. It's unusable because I'm sitting there with a GoPro on my head, so excited about being there. I'm like, oh, look at this thing, look at that thing. It's unusable footage. Uh, but uh, but I have plenty more, and it's funny. I asked Dr. Barnhart. I said, but for all intents and purposes, let's just say I'm doing guerrilla archaeology. Is there a place for that in the academic world? He said, absolutely, because nobody's going out there and doing it. And these places are not easy to get to. These places are not easy to catalog. And one of the other unfortunate things is, and I have found about a dozen of these places. I only went to one, but I found this by happenstance because sometimes when I'm using the satellite imagery, I'll roll the date back to um, it'll be a different season and I can see things better. And when I started to do that in this particular area, it's like there used to be ruins here. Wait, why aren't they there anymore? And move the satellite date forward, and you're starting to see agriculture. These and these aren't like little farms by the local community. These are like corporations coming in there and that have just eviscerated what was an archaeological site. And so, uh, and I actually spoke to an archaeologist while I was down there, and he said, "Yeah, it's a bigger problem than looting. I mean, it is a problem that they're facing down there frequently." And so, and that's become another facet of this entire mission here is who knows how long these places are going to be there for, and was there a 3D mapping taken of the site, before it's gone? We'll
Yeah.
never.
Well, hey, having a guy on YouTube going out like yourself and showing these places, I think that, and bringing awareness to these places, I think that might actually stop some of these corporations. It'll make them think twice before they come in and just level a
I
site.
mean,
Hopefully.
I would hope so,
Yeah.
and I mean the thing about that is also because it's happening in Brazil too, and the stance. I think it was in Forbes. Was it Forbes? It was something. But these corporations would sooner pay the fine for
Yeah.
destroying an archaeological site
Yeah.
than because they're the way they see it, they're going to make more profit from having this there.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, it's the ask forgiveness, not permission
yeah.
thing. And with them, they have enough money to throw at the problem.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I look forward to seeing what you find next. I mean, keep doing what you're doing. I foresee that your channel is only going to grow from here.
I appreciate that.
You've only had it for what, a year?
Not even a year.
Not
Not even
even a
a full
year.
year yet. Yeah.
Incredible.
I mean,
Incredible.
it's been I didn't expect this.
And you're interviewing top names already.
It's it's catapulted to levels I mean, I'm thinking things that I never dreamed I would even begin to think because all of a sudden now it might be possible, it might be possible to actually do some good and like work with organizations to help preserve things or help document things in a way that's better than just me and a GoPro. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like these places deserve so much more than that.
Yeah.
And I feel that like with that awareness might come some positive influence to these things.
Yeah, I mean that undocumented site with all those pyramids and temples that you were talking about. I mean, that how cool would it be to see that excavated?
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's just
then
the
and then
funding and the research and um I mean that's the other thing through the uh one of the best blessings of the channel is there's been people who have reached out to me who archaeologists have reached out to me and professors have reached out to me and kind of given me kudos for what I'm doing, but have also started to open the doors to possible connections in the Ministry of Culture and things of that nature, which is, I mean, all stuff that I don't even know how to begin to do.
hmm hmm
But as I grow and the channel grows, like this is becoming a very fundamental part of the mission of documenting, researching, exploring, and preserving these ancient sites.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to throw it out there too. I mean, people should check out your channel and everything, but if you're out there and you've got some resources and you've got some means to excavate, you should look into some of the spots that we talked about today because I mean, who knows what's underground? Again, I can't drive that point harder. Who even if there's not treasure down there and there might be, there's probably some beautiful artwork down there. I mean, just think I think in one of your videos, I think it was El Brujo,
Oh yeah.
there's a wall that's been excavated and it's serpent iconography, but it's beautiful artwork the way they depicted things. And then there's it's and then there's like it's almost Egyptian and looking in some of the ways where there's you show it shows people
It,
doing
like,
various tasks
yeah,
or whatever. And but it's artwork.
yeah.
And they
And the
even
colors.
color.
Yeah.
They use some paint or whatever. I don't know if they called it paint, but
But no, I
color.
mean it's beautiful, and especially if you look at the Temple of the Moon. But El Brujo is a little bit older. I mean, just and that was predominantly moche,
Yes.
and the moche artwork is phenomenal,
Yeah,
just absolutely phenomenal.
it is. And that's, you know, in the Pacific Northwest, some of the Native American art to me resembles the Moche art. I don't know if there's a connection there. I'm not saying there is, but just the way they depicted things. And by the way, I mean, that's beautiful art too.
Yeah.
But so if nothing else, like uh you're going to find some beautiful artworks
I mean,
that's incorporated right into the structures.
and I mean, they founded recently this year a 4,000-year-old Moche temple on the coast that has beautiful artwork, and they're saying it's like the one of the first religious temples on the coast, so things are continuing to be found.
What's the name of that site? Do you know off the top of your head? That's okay. I
Honestly, it's so recent, a simple Google search
yeah.
will bring it
I'll
up. I
cool.
think the archaeologist's name is Mura.
All right, I'll Google it
Yeah,
later. It's
yeah.
cool. We've been on point with our names so far. You haven't missed a beat with the names of places so far, so we're doing good. Um, yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you having me on here, and
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think I've said it enough. You know, people should check out your stuff, man. It's incredible stuff. Nobody's doing what you're doing in the capacity that you're doing it. I mean, it's just totally new, totally fresh, just outlaw stuff, man. I think people should check it out. So tell everyone where they can find you.
so I'm Pillars of the Past on Instagram, Pillars of the Past 101 on YouTube and Facebook and TikTok. Uh, my website, pillarsofthepast.com, just got to kind of revamp there, so that's up and live now, and Also, I have a free e-guide if anybody's interested in kind of finding out some tips and tricks that I've come up with along the way using Google Earth to identify these sites. Again, I'm shocked too, but my accuracy is 100% so far. So I have a free ebook if you put in your email address, and I'm also going to start doing newsletters. And then also definitely to support. The support is much needed for the mission of Pillars of the Past, and it helps to support me to continue to be able to do this and bring what I'm doing to everybody. Those support links are also on the website.
Yeah, and he's got some cool t-shirts too.
Thank you. I do have some cool merchandise that's all originally designed. So
Yeah.
links for that are on the site too.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming on. I'm looking forward to seeing what you uncover in the future. And as always, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.